Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Classical Antiquity Sidequest, a podcast covering topics from classical antiquity. The period of time is known for, as Edgar Allan Poe put it, the glory that was Greece, the grandeur that was Rome. Our next side quest will take us into yet another movie review, and this one also, like our last one, which was about the eagle, involves Roman Britain, sort of, possibly, loosely based, shall we say. We're going to review two pretty terrible movies that take place in said Roman Britain, and also deal with the Ninth Legion. I guess maybe the filmmakers were all sharing notes or whatever around the same time. One movie is Centurion from 2010, and the other is The Last Legion from 2011. Our guide for this side quest is none other than Victor Lamas, who we remember from our earlier episodes. Victor, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me back. It's been I enjoy these and I look forward to these every time you invite me. So again, I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad that you're willing to come back on. I don't know where to begin with these. I watched them both again in preparation for today. And let me just be clear when I say I watched them. We can talk about this more with Centurion. The first 30 minutes of that movie, I think, are pretty good.
Mhm.
Good fight scenes. It looks kind of like a B movie, and it's just going to be a fun, kind of silly flick. But much like a sprinter trying to run a marathon, once you get past that 1600 meters, you're in trouble. And that's, I think, what happened with Centurion the last 60 minutes. I just said to myself, what is happening here? I know AI didn't exist. Well, I know Chat GPT didn't exist then, but I felt like script writers were just going to Chat GPT and say, what else happens in a in
Right.
an epic movie, action movie, and we'll just throw that in there. And The Last Legion, I'm just gonna go ahead. I rate that an Effie Altis. That movie was awful. It was so bad.
That
Um,
movie, well, let's say that movie is filled with good actors, all of whom are, I guess, paying for their grandkids' college or their summer homes on the Amalfi Coast. Because I mean, to see Ben Kingsley. That guy must, I mean, he must be a generous grandfather to his brood because that was as I took the job because I needed the money as you can get for most of them.
yeah. So that movie, let me tell you how to watch it and enjoy it. Have it on in the background and don't pay attention to it at all and have no idea what is happening. Then the insanely dumb historical inaccuracies will not bother you. And the fact you will miss Ben Kingsley clearly not giving a crap about being in that movie because that is one thing I love about bad movies. Like I have not seen an actor so disinterested in what he's doing since Ben Affleck in the Justice League reshoots.
All
I'm
right.
just that
That guy,
movie.
if that guy smoked, he was stubbing out his cigarette in between takes and playing cards or throwing dice with the cameraman. Uh, Colin Firth as well.
Also did not care to be in that movie.
No, there's this beautiful actress from India. I mean, look, this movie was made in 2007. So I don't know, maybe she's on the beginning of her career, and obviously, she's probably taken anything that's thrown her way.
Right.
But I imagine
Yeah.
she looked at the script and said, probably gave out a sigh and said, "Well, welcome to Hollywood."
Well, so let's just give the audience kind of a rundown on, let's just
Right.
start with The Last Legion. That movie presumably follows a mythical tale of Romulus Augustulus. The timing is wrong, which we'll address in a minute. And the barbarians are coming to the gates. They are going to overthrow Romulus Augustulus. And there's a lot of mention of him having the blood of the Caesars. I would not pay attention to that or think about that. You're just going to get frustrated trying to construct
Right.
a lineage there, a lineage there that doesn't exist. The genealogy just doesn't work. So Ben Kingsley comes from Roman Britain to save him because he's this kind of druid guy who's trying to save Caesar's sword, I think, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
and people are trying to kill Romulus Augustulus in addition to deposing him. And then they end up back in Britain in about 460. Okay.
Right.
And
So
we
yeah, they're off
remember,
by
and this is where it gets really, if you're still with the movie, God bless you as we get through this plot description. But you'll recall that Rome ditched Britain. They hung up, said, "New phone, who dis?" and just left in about 410. They get to Hadrian's Wall and think that the Ninth Legion is going to be there to save them. And assuming that they do show up, which spoilers they do at the end, it's going to be a geriatric unit at that point, right? I mean, 50
yes.
years have passed. So who are these young dudes who are the extras who are in this legion that saves them from whoever the bad guys were? I don't care, and I'm not going to look it up.
Uh, well, I mean, like many Roman era movies, this movie, oh my goodness, this movie, it was a line, a criticism of the Gladiator of Gladiator 2 was uh, Hollywood loves its Roman aesthetics, but not, Roman history. And so what often happens with these movies is it's it's just a salad, right? They throw everything, or it's a stew. They throw everything that they think is recognizable about Rome, something that will spur some sort of, oh, columns, probably gladiators,
White statues.
statues, they had statues, all sorts of things, right? Chariots, even though, the chariots weren't used by the Romans, all sorts of things. And you throw it into a stew and you add a few names, right? You add a few names and you take some sort of part of history and either compress it or expand it or put it in a completely different time period or completely screwed up, right? Yeah, and to craft a story. And what you have here is it is basically the origin story of King Arthur, or at least Excalibur, and all those Arthurian myths, which it's usually that was done before in a different movie literally called King Arthur with Clive Owen, where a bunch of mercenary Roman auxiliary Sarmatians, and they end up becoming King Arthur and his round table, like the last of the Roman soldiers, sort of thing.
And I thought that was going to happen in this movie, but it just turns out that Romulus Augustulus is King Arthur's dad, which I thought was dumb, but that was
Right.
the least dumb thing probably in a lot of dumb things about this movie.
That's where we are, right? Relatively least dumb thing, right? There were other more dumb things. This movie was filled with it's all on a relative scale. What you also see in this movie is these 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 tropes. This movie reminded me of that that thing that once was an original thought in a science fiction story and then was done to death, where these last two humans on this planet, right, have survived all this cataclysm, and then you find out that the guy's name is Adam, right, and the and the woman's name is Eve. Oh, okay, this took place a long time ago, right? It reminds me of that thing. Oh, look, in this movie, if we just artfully cover up a few letters from the sword, guess what, people? It will spell Excalibur. And
What did they say? Tiberius hid the sword or something, and that's why it got lost, which I don't understand why you would ever lose the sword of Julius Caesar or there wouldn't be a bunch of fakes. I mean, I don't know.
exactly. And then,
But
and I mean, and then again, once again, I don't know. That's the other thing. I guess another trope of Hollywood in this case is, and this probably goes into a conversation about the difficulty of making these films about Rome or some of the, it simplifies the story to have a king, to have a monarch, right? And a lot of these Roman movies, it's very difficult to make a movie, say, about the Republic, right? Which to me would be far more interesting about, right, the politics of that era. But instead, you always have to, these movies seem to have to connect themselves always to some sort of Roman emperor. And maybe that's simply because, I don't know, the Hollywood producers, they need some simple hook, that's recognizable to the audience, because probably your average moviegoer does not know about, the only part they might sort of vaguely understand about the Roman Republic era was say Julius Caesar and Pompey, maybe, or Mark Antony versus Octavian, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, they'd have like the Punic Wars, but here, I mean, to your point earlier about how many good actors there were in this movie, Colin Firth and the actress who played Mira, who was this pretty awesome sword fighter
Hmm.
character, who then at the end just kind of turned into more of a stereotypical female movie character. I think the folks over at the Reading Party podcast had pointed that out. She was a really interesting character, but her and Colin had absolutely no chemistry at all. Like it was such a forced, and we're gonna make these two fall in love for some apparent reason.
Right.
And I mean, they had this sword fight scene where Colin's teaching her how to fight, and it was as awkward as the basketball scene in Catwoman, if you've seen that, and
Yeah.
just as
No, but
bad.
you just saying that line, I can already, I guess, extrapolate the awkwardness just
It
from the way
was.
the line was said.
Yeah, and so I kind of thought, with other good actors, Kevin McKidd, who we remember from his turn as Lucius Vorenus from
That's right.
HBO's Rome, I think probably, although he was a good villain in this, he was really hamming it up and having a lot of fun. I think he probably would have been better as the hero who was actually trying to get safe passage for Romulus Augustulus.
Yeah, I think he would have made, I think, a more believable hero than Colin Firth. It's difficult to see Colin Firth in a historical epic, epic. You use that term very loosely, like this film. Um, I don't know. I sometimes wonder with these movies when these actors are given the script and the director is given the script, and maybe they're all just, in this case, they're all just guns for hire. And like I said, they're earning their money. I don't know. Maybe they say, okay, I don't know how to play these lines other than to ham it up, right? Um, who knows?
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of good direction from that because again, Colin Firth is a good actor, Ben Kingsley's a good actor, Kevin McKidd is a very good actor. And sadly, for you Deep Space Nine fans out there, Dr. Bashir, who always shows up in a lot of these movies, was the ambassador from the Eastern Roman Empire, the eastern
That's
half of the
true.
Roman Empire, and then kind of turns on Romulus Augustulus there and just it would have been nice if he had been maybe one of the actors. He was also in
Alexander Siddig, that's his name.
right, and he was also in Reign of Fire, which is a fantastic movie.
Underrated movie.
Yeah,
He actually,
totally.
Alexander Siddig played. There's a you can probably find on YouTube. And there was a docudrama about Hannibal that was actually very good, and Alexander Siddig plays Hannibal. Um, it actually had really fantastic battle scenes in it. See if I can find it, but yeah, I. So I mean, obviously, I guess to your audience here, we are not recommending this movie, are we? Or are we're recommending it as a if you like terrible movies, um, and if you
Yeah,
like picking things out, well, I'll tell you what, this movie does have a thing that I'll mention in Centurion, and that is also such a trope of Hollywood battles, not just ones that are supposed to take place in the classical era or the ancient era, but in all battles, is the stuff they light on fire and then catapult or roll down hills. Hollywood loves its big burning balls of fire. Um,
that's exactly what this movie was. A giant. I mean, it was just a burning pile of cash that was wasted. I sent you a clip for those of you who don't know this. Black Zeus X is one of the funniest accounts on social media. And then he'll take movies and TV shows, usually from the 80s or early 90s, and he'll start it off with, "So imagine." And then he'll describe what happens. And I was thinking about this for this movie, like what he would do. And I kind of said to myself, it'd be something like this. So imagine you Romulus Augustulus. You supposed to get deposed in 476
Yeah.
AD, but for some reason you in this movie and they deposing you in 460 AD because the producer don't know how to read a Wikipedia page. That's just sad. Then Dr. Bashir from DS9 show up, forget all about his Hippocratic oath, start slapping women like he Gold Dukat. This movie dumb as hell. And I think that's about really all you need to say. I mean, they named
And
the
that was that,
movie,
and there was some scrunchy faced kid who
right? Yeah, yeah.
who got to be king at the end, right?
Yeah, you some scrunchy face kid named Romulus Augustulus. Um, yeah, I mean, I just, to your point, I think it was Orson Welles who said that a director's first job is basically, this is paraphrasing, you're a storyteller, so your first duty should always be to the story. And there
Right.
was no story in here. This was just let's do this, and then this, and then this, and then boom, magically this last legion will appear.
You know what? Actually,
And
yeah,
I,
it reminds me of, in some sense, of bad, like what we're gonna. It reminds me of bad AI. So this is maybe an AI program that maybe was just given a not a big database, right, to come from, but you can cull all sorts of things. So it culled from history to create this stream of consciousness movie. Because even in the middle, when they're traveling to they're traveling to Britannia, I mean, they're going through the mountains. And that was as big a ripoff from the Lord of the Rings scene, right? In the first movie, when they're traveling through the mountains to find whatever, the mines of Moria or something. It was literally that. It was and that's when the AI program said, well, we got to, travel. We have to travel over the Alps.
let's have a
Um,
map scene
let's
like in Indiana Jones.
Right. Let's pick that scene and make it worse. It was like,
Yeah.
a great value Walmart scenes, right? Just pastiched together. It's a shame. Obviously, what's the cliche line for a lot of this is there's a great story. There's an actual the actual historical part of all this is there's many movies there that could be made, and and none of those movies were made. Instead, this movie was made. Um,
Yeah, I think that's right. The director is not known for directing movies. In addition to this film, The Last Legion, he directed Dragonheart: A New Beginning, which is a direct-to-video sequel of the 1996 film Dragonheart, which we all remember from Sean Connery voicing the dragon, and Dennis Quaid was in that.
I do remember
Um,
that movie was terrible.
I'm sure. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, and the fact that I have a fond memory from it as a kid means it's, I'm sure, terrible. And my wife and I have had this discussion about things that we've watched as kids and not rewatching those things as adults. But yeah, this is, and what's really sad about The Last Legion is again, there's so many good actors: Colin Firth, Ben Kingsley. We've named them all. Alexander Siddig is a character actor, but he's really good in most everything that he does.
Sure.
So it's just unfortunate to see him wasted like this. I'm trying to think. I mean, the lighting is terrible too. It's always bright and sunny out, and this is supposed to be a thriller. It should be dark and rainy occasionally. I
Yes.
I don't know. Also, too, at the end, so Colin Firth and Kevin McKidd, the good guy and the big bad, are fighting each other at the end of the battle, and all the other bad guys have been beaten and fled, right? There's some guy who has a gold face. Don't really, this isn't important, and who cares? That Ben Kingsley had to beat. It all goes back to this thing at the beginning about how he had this. He was branded by him, but don't none of that crap matters. So anyway, there's a fight at the end between these two guys, and the last Legion has shown up, scared off all the bad guys, and Colin
Right.
is getting the crap beat out of him by
He
Kevin
does. It
McKidd.
was kind of a uninspired, like
Yeah,
yes, he
but
got his
nobody
butt beat.
helps. You see guys like grave robbers walking around in the background, and no soldiers come over to help this guy out. And like Kevin McKidd is like beating this dude within an inch of his life. Where are the other soldiers?
They were done. They probably thought it was dishonorable to help Colin Firth's character, so they just kind of hoped it all worked out. Um,
But
again, to go back to my guess is the script. When you talk, so one of the baddies in this movie, right? Vortigern or Vorgan or something. He has this mask on, and then and then it's finally pulled off at the end. Meant nothing. There was no big reveal. There was
yeah,
nothing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
my only guess is that the one of the script writers, maybe one of the 50 guys that got, $15 an hour to work on this script, read Doctor Doom comics, right? Fantastic Four
Yeah,
comics,
I see that.
and he remembered that Doctor Doom wore a mask and it was like welded onto his face. There's no other reason for that guy to have that mask on. No other reason. Um,
Yeah, they never explain why he has that mask, I don't think, do they?
no.
Yeah. And if they did,
So
I clearly had checked out by that point anyway. So, but at the end, the good guys survive, and it turns out Ben Kingsley was Merlin, and he was telling stories to young King Arthur, the new scrunchy face kid. Let's just rank this movie. Remember the criteria or the selections, choices are all around excellent movie, Alexander the Great, surprisingly good, Claudius, we're nowhere near there. Good but not great, Pyrrhus. Oof. Average, not good but not terrible is a Probus, and an awful is an Ephialtes. I've already said mine is Ephialtes, 100%. Do not watch this
I
movie. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
I would rank this movie as if Ephialtes somehow went into the past and somehow re-impregnated himself and had a child with himself. What would come out of this would be this film.
having having watched this 1.25 times, the quarter is my attention span as I watched it today. I agree with that. Ben Kingsley tossing the bad guy into the burning tree couldn't even save this movie.
No,
Um, that did. There's a lot of spoilers here. I
I
apologize, but
I hope right. Well, I guess we're not spoiling it for you. I guess we can say to the audience because there's nothing to spoil. This movie was spoiled from the get-go. It's pretty rancid. But it might be, just like, I don't know, when you were a kid and someone told you there's some dead cat on the street somewhere and you had to go see it, right? Because you were just morbidly curious. This is perhaps the way you should approach this film. Much like, I don't know, the one time I rented Battlefield Earth because I'd heard it was so terrible, the John Travolta Scientology film. I had to see this film for myself, and it was worth the watch to see such a terrible film. So perhaps that's how we would recommend this film.
it
But again,
did get Tiberius's villa on Capri correct, though. I'll give them that. But there's a reason that against a budget of 67 million, it made 25.67 million dollars. So it failed to recoup its investment. Mm.
can't imagine why.
All right. So let's move to our next movie, Centurion, which also had a good cast, a
It
lot of
was.
good actors, and it had, I think, for the first about 30 minutes, you can see there's the bones of a good movie there. All right.
Yes.
It's got Michael Fassbender, it's got McNulty, Dominic West. It's got some, and I'm going to get their names wrong here. Let me just check. Yeah, David Morrissey, who was he played the governor in The Walking Dead. You had Liam Cunningham, who was Davos, I think is how you pronounce it, in Game of Thrones.
Great. I really like him.
Yeah, there were some good actors in this, and I'll
It's,
let you throw in kind of the plot of what the movie's about.
okay, so this movie takes place again around the time of that other movie review, The Eagle. It's about the a soldier, well, centurion, officer who, when his legion is ambushed, right? It's his legion is ambushed and slaughtered. Um, he one of some of the soldiers that escape is our hero, played by Michael Fassbender. They capture. He's also there's this woman Pictish warrior who's mute, who seeks vengeance on all Romans. And so
Yeah, she betrays the Romans.
she's originally is hired in some sense by as a scout, right? Much the way, say, like Apaches were hired as scouts, in the cavalry movies. But she leads them into the ambush. Almost the whole legion is massacred, and their commander is captured. And then they try to recapture him. And they also have to make their way back to, I don't want to spoil too much of it. And they have to make their way back to the safety of, beyond Hadrian's Wall, which that part of Rome is ruled by, the governor of the Roman controlled area, Britannia, but north of the wall, it is not. So you essentially here have, once again, you have a good big battle at the beginning, and then you have essentially then after that sort of a Dirty Dozen like kind of movie, and coupled with sort of an escape chase movie, um, with all elements of revenge and betrayal and the final, and then there's a final surprise, a twist at the end.
I will say there were some liberties, like with most movies from this time period. They're about Rome itself. There were some historical inaccuracies. The Picts were not around. I think this was in 117 AD, is what they say at the beginning. The Picts were not really around then. They also mention Agricola, which was a nice historical reference, but I think he would have been dead by then. But I will give them credit at least for mentioning Agricola in the movie, because that is trying to at least put you kind of in context of what you're going to be dealing with.
It's so everything. So in other words, I mean, if you think of where historical accuracy is in this movie, there are characters or peoples or events that are either you have a range of about 100 years, right? It's either 50 years into the future or maybe more that was out of date, or like this guy Agricola, who's famous, this famous Roman governor, mostly because I think his nephew wrote a book about him, Tacitus. Um, and that's just that would have existed 50 years before. So you have about 100-year sort of range of accuracy-ish in this movie. I'll say, I mean, the positive stuff is, again, it had good actors. The actors were given better things to do and say than they were in The Last Legion. I think Michael Fassbender and Dominic West, Dominic West really sells. He's the commander of the Legion, right? The legate. And he sells it. He's good. And he looks like someone maybe from that era.
And McNulty was good in the movie. He looked like a guy. Him and the action scenes are actually pretty good. The fight scenes are good. They're violent, except for the rolling balls of fire, which we'll address later. Um, and they used it at the wrong time in the movie, which we'll discuss, I think. But he was really good and he was locked in. I think where I started to lose interest in the movie was the Ninth Legion, um, is McNulty's Legion, if I remember correctly. They are being guided by Etain. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but the Pict, or Caledonian, I can't remember, Caledonian, who has had her tongue cut out and is going to betray the Romans. She leads them into a trap. The Legion is basically slaughtered. And that is really where I thought McNulty's character should have died
Right.
and been killed on the battlefield, but for some reason he survives, is taken back to camp, and then we get into a real McNulty subplot where they try to save him. And I start to lose interest there because she ends up fighting McNulty after he's been chained up for like what, 3, 4 days and is worn down, and what could have been an awesome fight scene between the two of them just has no meaning at that point.
I see what you mean. It was that whole thing was a little, maybe it felt like either padding screen time or an attempt. So I mean, there's a the character. One of the villains, obviously, is this woman played by Olga Kurylenko, and she plays again this person who had this scout Attain, who wants vengeance on the Romans, and leads this legion into a big ambush, right? And then ends up killing the captured general of this legion, played by McNulty from The Wire, Dominic West. I guess it was a way to get her to have her get her revenge, or to emphasize, perhaps the reason was to emphasize the savagery, the skill at fighting of this woman, right? So to make her, you have to set her up for her battle at the end, right? I guess it's almost like that Alfred Hitchcock line, uh, don't show a gun if you're not going to fire it in the third act, that sort of thing, right? So we had to see this. We had to see this woman sort of display some of her fighting skills to have some sort of, I don't know, climax at the end, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought they could have fought on the battlefield and she
There
could
you
have
go.
taken out a bunch of people. Although to your point about this just had me thinking about got me back to the fireballs that the Picts unleashed on the Romans. Why would you roll a bunch of flaming balls down the hill and then fire them, follow them because the area you're going to is going to be on fire when you get there?
Right. It's the same thing in the first Gladiator movie where they're setting this whole forest on fire, and then they're going into that fire to fight rather than letting the smoke and, I guess, the flames draw these people out. Um, we know the reason. The reason is because a fire looks cool on screen. Um, and people are afraid of fire. So when balls of fire start rolling down a hill towards you, that's an easy way to let the audience know they're in danger. But again, superior movies, and again, this movie reminds me of this whole scene in some sense, and the later killing of Dominic West's character, the general, reminds me of, and then the scout who leads them into an ambush. This reminds me of a far superior scene in The Last of the Mohicans, right? The Michael Mann movie. Right? There, yeah, these scenes where a scout leads betrays, who he's been hired by, and then you do have like this enveloping ambush on both sides, right? That reminded me of that. It could have been done without. It could have been done without the fire. It would have been a good
Yeah,
scene. I I
yeah.
I always like it when they take the time to put some pretty good looking Roman equipment and gear on screen. I thought this movie did it better than The Last Legion. Um, and it looked good. I thought the whole helmets on the generals looked great. It looked worn and usable and of the time. And you had a good scene. You could have had a really good battle scene there. And why do you have to put the flaming balls of wicker wood and all that?
So, as I was sort of watching this again today, it reminded me of, you remember Men in Tights, when they're trying to cross the river, and I can't remember who won't let Robin Hood pass, and Dave Chappelle is there with them. And it seems like you could just kind of step out of the way of the rolling fire pretty easily. And it's kind of
Right.
like Dave Chappelle saying, I'm on the East Bank, I'm on the West Bank.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what I was thinking. It'd be
It's kind
easy to get
of,
out of the
or
way.
yeah, it's that scene in Revenge of the Sith where at the end of this incredibly long and too long lightsaber fight, Obi-Wan Kenobi jumps off about 20 feet later and says it's over because I have the high ground, because he's standing on this hill, and all I guess Anakin Skywalker would have to do is walk up, right? And the high ground is no longer the high ground.
But as
Yes,
we know from the Clone Wars TV show, Anakin can get a little full of himself and have to prove a point. So, and speaking of Star Wars, though, when McNulty yells out, "It's a trap," you totally should have CGI'd in Admiral Akbar right there. That would have elevated the movie to a whole other level.
Well,
right?
if Tyler Durden from Fight Club had been the screener, right, the camera guy, and he definitely would have
Hmm.
spliced the subconscious Admiral Akbar there in that scene, right?
Yeah,
The man.
yeah, that would have been good. So when they try to save McNulty and rescue him, one of the guys, and this is where I kind of got lost, and to your point of where it just seemed like the screenwriters were just trying to fill time. They infiltrate the Picts camp, and one of the guys in the group, I guess to go back to the Dirty Dozen, is like the Telly Savalas character in that, and he just starts to go crazy. He kills, I think, the chief's son
Yes.
for reasons that weren't particularly clear to me. Then they leave, and then they get separated, and there's two groups of the surviving Romans. And the one guy who killed the boy also then betrays one of his soldiers and leaves him to get eaten by wolves. Which I guess you're trying. It felt to me like they were trying to put in some sort of John Huston ending from like the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, where everybody gets what they deserve, but you hadn't really developed the characters enough to do that. One and two, it would have made a little bit more sense if those two had tried to fight the wolves off together, and you had sort of like a band of brothers type tale about soldiers fighting together. I mean, that just seemed like a, hey, let's do this. I saw this in a movie or I read it in a book once and it seemed cool. Let's do it.
Yeah, there was no reason to have that sort of yeah, there's no reason to make that character sort of a subplot villain, right? The elements and just trying to get away from these guys is enough. And I wonder sometimes these movies. So why does this movie? I mean, this movie has it could have been really good and it wasn't. Why does this movie fail perhaps in a way that say The Eagle does not?
Well,
What's your view?
so I think again, there's too many McNulty subplots. There are things that are not really necessary to advance the story. And I think that kind of comes home towards the end too, where Um, for some reason, three of the guys, the governor, the guy from Game of Thrones, and Michael Fassbender find this Roman British woman
Mhm.
who's like a witch, sort of, and she's just out in the middle of nowhere. And again, it's a very Treasure of the Sierra Madre-ish, except the movie wasn't really building to that. And so you're like, what is the point of this? Why is Michael Fassbender going to fall in love with this woman at the end of the movie? I just think there's a lot of stuff in here that's unnecessary. It's also a short movie. I mean, it's 97 minutes, so I'll give it credit for that. But you remember the movie U-571, the World War II movie?
Yes,
Matthew
Matthew
McConaughey,
McConaughey.
Harvey
Yeah.
Keitel. Not a great movie,
No,
right?
but it was solid if I remember.
Yeah, I think Bill Paxton was in it. Not a great movie, but it said we are going to be an action movie and we're going to be a movie about a guy trying to captain a sub. That's all we're going to be, and that's all we're going to do.
Yes.
This movie, I don't think ever really picked a theme and stuck with it. It tried to throw in too many things. And I think whereas The Eagle was about one man trying to regain his family's lost honor, and that's what it was about. And it was as accurate as you can be, I think, with Hollywood, the big screen budget. This movie just was like, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to throw in this McNulty subplot and that McNulty subplot,
Yeah.
and I just think instead of picking as a trial lawyer, you got to pick a case theory instead of picking a case theory and going with that theory, it just threw everything against the wall and tried to see what would work. And its box office numbers proved it really didn't work.
You know, I agree with that, and I think it is the when you have too many and with a good running time of 97 minutes, right? And when movies are now, often so bloated nowadays, 97 minutes, you can tell a great story in 97 minutes, depends on the story. The Eagle told a good, solid story. It wasn't overly ambitious in all of its subplots. It didn't have too many characters that you had to develop, and that's why it worked. I'll tell you a movie, a chase movie where you have, grand epic scale and yet it was very elemental, very simple, and that's what made it work. And this movie could have been a Roman version of that, was maybe Apocalypto, right? Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, where they're captured, they're taken to this Mayan capital city to be sacrificed. They manage to live, and then one guy escapes, and then the rest of the movie is him trying to, it's a chase movie. This movie had elements of that. It had the chase element. Imagine, so almost like we could have made it better. Imagine, because the other thing is that these movies, The Eagle, and said, but what they really want to tell is in some ways is the story of the Teutoburg Forest, right? The famous annihilation of a Roman army by these barbarians in these dark forests, right? That's in Germany in AD 9, right? Augustus Caesar. That's what these movies, that's what they take these scenes where a legion's getting ambushed. What they're really trying to recreate is the destruction of Varus's legions in the famous Teutoburg Forest ambush battle, right? That stopped the Roman Empire from going north. Imagine a chase movie, and the Roman soldiers that were captured alive were later burned in wicker cages by the Germans, right? A fearful end. So imagine a film like this. A better film could have been made where you have an amazing battle scene, right? The destruction of Varus's legions, and then you have our character, our hero, Michael Fassbender, because there were Romans that managed to escape, pursuing Germans and make their way back to Roman controlled parts of the empire. That could have been the film. That could have been a film. That would have been you could have had big spectacle, and then you could have also had the chase, the thrilling of a chase. And it wouldn't have been, and you wouldn't have had to have created too many characters. You would have created enough. These films, I wonder if these Roman movies often, because it's ancient Rome, they feel that Rome, some folks tend to think of the Roman era is very complex, right? So they feel like you have to stuff it with everything. And that's often to the detriment of these movies.
Yeah, I think the movie should have been about Michael Fassbender becoming the leader and McNulty telling him, get them home,
Right.
get as many as you can home. And, he maybe was younger. He wasn't supposed to be the leader, but he assumes that role and he shepherds them back, or as many of them back as he can. At the end, where they try to have him killed because he'll tell the truth about what happened to the Ninth Legion, I mean, I had checked out by that point anyway, so that was the least of my concerns. But I thought that was a little much and unnecessary. And then when he goes out to live among the wild,
Right.
Britons,
The lady that saved them. I'm trying to think, what's the reason for that? I mean, in some sense, you cannot. Well, it goes back to, I think, maybe a comment you made about the Eagle. In some sense, these, one cannot be too much on the side of the other, right? And
Mhm.
so there had to be some ultimate twist at the end that, the Romans, well, remember, the Romans are imperialists, and this governor, they're the bad guy, right? So we have to have we can't just have him basically welcoming these guys in. We have to have some signal that we, the audience, cannot sympathize too much with the Romans, right? Because think of all the quote villains in this movie. They all have good reasons, right? You could have made a movie from their point of view. Right? The guy who leads the army of barbarians, the Caledonians or Picts that destroy this legion. What was his backstory was he was a farmer and his family was killed, right? The villainess had every reason to hate the Romans, and good for her for killing soldiers that whose soldiers like them had cut her tongue out and killed her family. And so at the end, and our hero is pure, right? Our Michael Fassbender here, he's more pure. So he has to learn a lesson obviously about his own kind, right? That they are evil. I guess that's why they had to do something like that.
Yeah, but you'd already established that there were bad Romans anyway, so I don't. I mean, really, I felt like the movie should have ended so the audience understands. And I wouldn't say don't watch this movie, but we'll get to that when we rank it. They get to a fort that's been abandoned as there's a pullback to Hadrian's Wall. And this is where the fire actually would have come in handy because when I watched it the first time, there's three Michael Fassbender and his two fellow centurions are in this hollowed out, beaten, half burned. There's not much of it left. It's easily accessible fort. And so four or five picked soldiers come upon it and they say, I got a great idea. Huddle up. All right, we're just going to go in, guns blazing. We're just going to charge them. And I'm thinking to myself, this is actually where you would just, starve them out or throw the balls of fire at them because you have numerical superiority. Just
Right.
send back for help. They have no food, they have no water. Just surround them and starve them out, and they're going to die. But again, to your point about Hollywood wants this epic battle, everything has to be epic. We have to have this great fight. And this guy, shoves a guy from Game of Thrones, realizes he's going to die. So he shoves a spear through his own body to kill the evil Pict behind him, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a cool way to go out, to say with Star Wars, a lot like the deaths in Rogue One, which were fantastic cinematic death scenes. But I just sat there and watched it and just, I'm more than happy to suspend my disbelief, but that was just dumb.
I by the way, speaking of Rogue One, I think one of the actors was from Rogue One was in this film as well. His name was Riz Ahmed. He played one of the, I think, Roman soldiers that was in the band that eventually.
Oh, he was the defecting Imperial pilot.
Correct.
That's right.
Um, but again, it tells you obviously these actors, they gotta, they're working actors. Most of these folks, they're working actors that are trying to make their, you know, they're just they really do have mortgages and they got to pay and they got to find their jobs as they can. Um, I you know I always look for I'm always excited when a Roman era movie comes out and it's but I for the most part my expectations, how do I say this? My expectations are low and usually my expectations are met. My expectation for this one, I mean, again, I was fooled by the poster. I had high hopes for it. It's not as bad as Last Legion. It's solid, and but the tragedy is that it could have been much better. Um, and why? I mean, so maybe I don't know. Maybe what's a fruitful way to go from here is it the era itself that leads to, I mean, so when we tend to think of Roman era movies, we first tend to think of the biblical epics, right? Ben-Hur,
Right.
Quo Vadis, that spent tons of money. Quo Vadis is a huge spectacle. If you've ever seen it, it's worth seeing for many reasons, but also simply as an artifact of when they made movies like that 70 years ago. Ben-Hur, right? The famous chariot scene, the robe, Demetrius and Spartacus, obviously Stanley Kubrick's movie with Kirk Douglas, which is in many ways obviously a classic film and it's got some amazing stuff in it. But overall, Hollywood's, then there's the famous Cleopatra, right? The one with Elizabeth Taylor, which is not a good film.
No, it has good moments in it, but there are parts of it where, again, everything had to be epic, where she shows up in Rome and the elephants and the dancers and all that and
Right.
everything. It's an amazing scene, but you're just like, what was the point of that?
Right. Is it? And then you have productions that could be great. The one tragedy is HBO's Rome, I mean, there was a very, and people use this as shorthand for intrigue and violence and characters that live in the gray. And I'm talking about Game of Thrones, right? Here was a Game of Thrones type story, right? The fall of the Republic, right? Caesar, Pompey, the Senate, Cato, Cicero, Octavian, Mark Antony, right? And HBO had these grand ambitions for a 5-season arc, right? And who knows, it could have gone on longer had it been successful. And then after the first season, which was, I thought, pretty good, they chickened out because of the cost.
Right.
And they compressed seasons 2, 3, 4, 5 into the second season. And that's it. And that was as close as we've had to many of the things that perhaps you and I would wish for in a production of the era, right? Great stories. It's there for you. Lots to do with that. Production money there and a fairly good commitment to trying to get the accuracy right of what battles would have looked like, what Rome would have looked like. And then they chickened out.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to get right, but I tell you, I have you when you mentioned Riz Ahmed, I'm going to quote Shaq here to Riz. I owe you an apology. I wasn't really familiar with your game. Uh, I didn't know he was quite as accomplished of an actor and a musician as he was when I just checked that on Wikipedia right now, which shows how old and out of touch I am with the kids these days. But congrats, man. This was probably, when he was getting his start and working his way up. I
Yeah,
do think what I don't know and I'd like to see a study on is take your percentage of just craptacular movies that get made in general, like take all movies, how many of them are not good? And then um, take that and collect all the ones that are made about ancient Rome or antiquity and see if the percentage is about the same.
right.
I'd be curious to see that, or is it because you only get one or two every so often that the expectations get so high and then the results are often in line with what we see in other movies. And that I don't know the answer to, but I was thinking about that today. Um,
No, that's a good point. I mean, these movies were made in the wake of Gladiator, right? Gladiator was a big success.
Right. Not a
And
good movie,
these,
but a success.
yes, we're talking about the original Gladiator. I like it far less than most people do. But I recognize that it was a success, and thus in its wake came lots of, well, a few. Came a few movies trying to capitalize on that, and Centurion is one of them. So is The Last Legion, and but to the point, Hollywood. There's so many people that have there's so many cooks in these kitchens,
Right.
and who knows? Maybe there was a script that was more pared down, and then maybe your various screenwriting, your edits say, well, let's add this to that, let's add that, and by the time it's finally ready to go, the script's too overloaded with.
Well, yeah, and sometimes when you bring in people to do the rewrites, it's not as good, or you lose sight of the original vision that was
Right.
there. I mean, to stick with our Rogue One references, they did reshoots and they tweaked the ending, and they really just made a decision to accept the fact you have not seen a lot of these characters in the movie, in the other movies, and the rest of the Star Wars universe for a reason. Let's embrace that and not run from that. And for
Right.
those of you who haven't seen it, I would watch the first season of Andor. Probably want to watch part of Rebels, the cartoon show, and then watch Rogue One. But the way they just embraced where that movie was naturally heading, again, it was a self-contained, focused story that didn't try to be too much, right? And that's why it was so good. I think the Eagle, if it had just made that decision, it could have, or not the Eagle, excuse me, the Centurion. If Centurion had made that decision, I don't think it'd be a great movie, but it could have been a Claudius and been surprisingly good, where you say, wow, I didn't expect this, you know?
Right. Yeah, the Eagle played for me. The Eagle was that surprising. I had low expectations, and then I was very pleasantly surprised by it. Um, we have yet to get to we have yet. Typically with these sorts of movies, I think I've made this point before in other movies. I sometimes I'm like one of those folks that are panning for gold, right? You sift through a lot of dirt and then you find little nuggets. And for me, that's often a scene. There are little nuggets here in this movie of things that I liked, right? Even just the way they march, or at the beginning of the ambush, how the soldiers sort of start to deploy, right, with their shields, little things like that. Um, the Last Legion had no nuggets, frankly. I just
Yeah.
it would be nice. It would be nice to see something that was just amazing all the way through. And I'm trying to think of, I mean, and it's not a film. I mean, again, none of these really stand up to I, Claudius, which tells you how to do things like this with no budget to speak of compared to obviously what these films have.
Well, and the story there, they said we're going to tell a story, and they told the story.
Right. And they didn't, yeah, and they didn't deviate much from the singular vision of the author, right?
Right.
In that.
Right.
I wonder, yeah, I mean, Alexander, I know you and I probably differ a little bit on that. I think Alexander, at least the cut that Oliver Stone likes the most, of all the movies that are big budget movies about the ancient world, that to me is probably the best one. And it's, it's maybe that's saying something. For all of you listening to this, and you are looking, I mean, there are movies that are worth watching simply for the spectacle or to see lots of nuggets, even if the whole thing is in a vein of gold. The Fall of the Roman Empire, which I don't know if you've ever had a chance to see yet. I love the music in that film. I love many aspects of that film, but it is not a good film. It's not a great film. It's kind of long, but I still have a much affection for it.
Are you
1965.
are you suggesting that 300 Rise of an Empire is not the single greatest antiquity movie ever made?
Good
Anyway, that's
Lord.
sarcasm.
Yeah.
We could
That,
probably talk about Troy too in another day, but we'll save that for later because we are running low on time. So let's give this movie
all right.
a ranking. Again, all around excellent. Alexander the Great, surprisingly good. Claudius, good, not great. Pyrrhus, average. Well, just not good, but not terrible. I would call this actually forgettable. Probus, and awful Ephialtes.
I mean, I think you and I are probably like, I give this a Probus.
Correct. Correct. If you saw it, good for you. If you didn't see it, your life is not going to change in any way. I mean, it's a movie you will forget about.
If let's lose a biblical allusion here to the era. If you are looking for the ultimate Roman movie, this one, and you come across this one, you don't need to. It is a false prophet. It is not. It is not who it advertises itself to be. You can probably pass it by, but if you like a solid B movie and you simply like to see Roman army equipment on the screen, you can do worse on a Sunday afternoon if it shows up on TBS, right? And you're just sitting on your couch.
Yeah, if you need a background movie, something on TV while you're working, this is not a terrible one to have back in the background. It's not a good movie. Um, it had the potential to be good, but it wasn't. So I think go with it. But it's a Probus. You're not gonna if you so you're asked what is this movie about or what happened in it, I think you're gonna struggle to remember it because it's just kind of a messy blender of a plot, right? So. On that note, before we get into a future movie podcast episode, I do want to give Super Sky Points RIP to Gene Hackman.
Mm.
We're recording this not long after details about Gene Hackman and his wife's death have come out. So if you have elderly folks in your family and people who may have dementia or some degree of Alzheimer's, check in on them. I mean, it's just really sad. I'm not going to recount it here. You can go online and look it up. But Gene Hackman, great actor in a lot of wonderful movies. Actually wrote a Western novel that I'm going to have to find and read. But just a very, very sad story the way that ended. So I did want to.
Great. I grew up on Gene Hackman movies, and again, one of the great comic book movies of all time is the original Superman with Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. He is fantastic in that movie. Obviously, other movies like The French Connection or The Conversation, Hoosiers. Um, that guy could do it all. And so it is. I'm getting into this part of my life now where, yeah, actors that I grew up watching their movies are they're I mean they're really old and they're passing away. And he's one of them. So rest in peace, Gene Hackman.
Yeah. And of course, if you want to see probably, I don't know if you can say his greatest role, but one of his greatest, you definitely need to watch Unforgiven.
Hmm.
He is so good as Little Bill in that movie. Uh, you talking about that Queen of yours again, Bob, on Independence Day? That movie, he anyway. Just go watch that. Hoosiers, of course, is great, but of course, is that theory from what was it, PCU, the Kane Hackman theory that at any given time there is a movie starring Michael Caine or Gene Hackman on TV. So check that out. And well, not that movie necessarily, but check out some Gene Hackman flicks if you get a chance. So Victor, why don't you give us an idea for another movie? I think you'd suggested a couple last time that we can also work in. These were two of them, and there was another movie about a Greek philosopher. I can't remember her name or
Oh,
mathematician. Uh,
yes.
so we've got that one, but give us maybe another movie we could review.
You mentioned Troy. Troy, and that there's a couple films. One's Troy, the other one was called Helen of Troy, and then there was a 10-part miniseries on Netflix a few years ago about Troy, Fall of a City or so. We could definitely get some mileage, I think, some fun conversations about and probably centered around that film Troy that starred Brad Pitt as Achilles. That might be a fun
He
one
was
to
so bad.
that might be a fun because that movie, what you also see in that movie is, it's a perfect encapsulation of here's what Hollywood, and probably correctly so, here's what they think the audience thinks of. When they think of Greeks, right? Ancient Greece, you're thinking of an exact time period. And this movie, obviously, it takes place 1,000 years before that. And yet they still have to have them look like the Greeks that you and I would recognize as audience members, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Um, that's another film that had really many great actors in it. Um, so that might be a fun one to talk about. Any other films?
I like the idea of Troy and Helen of Troy together. I think that might be good. Dr. Sereno, I think, is going to come back on at some point, maybe this summer, and we're going to talk about the idea of epics, uh,
Yeah,
portraying epics with the Odyssey being in production right now. So I think that's a good idea. So let's try to plan on Helen of Troy and also Troy, and we can talk about overacting in the context of Troy and people trying to throw emphasis on each word, which I did when I would act, but I wasn't a professional, and that's
right.
why I realized I had no future as an actor. So I had this on in the background recently. Everybody else was gone for spring break, but me, I worked to support my family's luxurious lifestyle. And I just noticed how Orlando Bloom was terrible in that movie, and uh, uh, um, Brad Pitt was terrible in that movie because they were, and even the guy who played Hector, they were putting such emphasis on every single word. And then you would see Sean Bean and the guy who played Agamemnon,
Right.
and
They're
they
much more
were
natural, right?
exactly. So I think there's a lot we can talk about there.
Absolutely. Yes. So let's see if we make that our next one. That would be a fun rewatch. Because despite its flaws, I enjoy it for many reasons. So yeah, let's make that our next one. And then we can also talk about the 50s big budget one that was called Helen of Troy with Helen Podesta. And it also had probably some actors that you'd recognize in other movies of the time. All right. Well, thank you again for having me as a guest on your podcast, Ben.
No problem, Victor. I'm glad to do it. Always glad to have you on, and thanks for continuing to do this. I look forward to doing more movie reviews and other episodes with you. Now, if you want to stay in touch with the podcast, go to the website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Check out the socials, either at Duke FB Coverage or at Antiquity Pod. Hey, why don't you give us a call, 540-632-0160. Leave a message, and you'll get an episode. Thanks to Brent Arehart, who put this wonderful theme music together. And stay tuned, folks. More episodes are coming because, as you know, the Classical Antiquity Sidequest is a podcast without end.